Hey everyone, welcome to Advantage Point, the series where we unpack how smarter systems and sharper thinking create strategic advantage. This season, we're tackling one of the biggest headaches in SaaS and e-commerce, integrations. Now, here are a few numbers to put it into perspective. Over 70% of SaaS leaders say that integration complexity is the number one barrier to adoption. Companies lose on average about $500,000 a year to poor integration and data silos. But here's the upside. Teams that nail integrations report 3 times faster revenue growth compared to peers who struggle. Integrations aren't just plumbing in the background, they're effectively the steering wheel of growth. Get them wrong and you're firefighting. Get them right and you lock speed, clarity, and scale. Today we're asking the question, how are the best teams solving the SaaS integration crisis in 2025? And what can the rest of us learn? Joining me is the exact man for that job, Paul Byrne, founder and president of Rosario, an award-winning e-commerce and software development firm that's helped brands on platforms like Magento, BigCommerce, Shopify, and the list goes on. And he's even built compliant SaaS like Automatic FFL. Paul has also written thought-provoking pieces on AI, security, and the future of the web. So he must have a crystal ball in him somewhere, but we'll possibly get into that as we have a discussion. Paul, sir, welcome to the Advantage Point.
Thank you very much, Danny. I really appreciate being invited. I think you have a great thing going here, and I'm happy to participate.
Thank you very much. And I'm happy that you agreed to participate. So thank you very much for coming along and giving us some of your time. So Absolutely. Before we dive in, Paul, how did you get into moving yourself from corporate marketing into building a software firm that tackles some of these really thorny integration issues? They seem like miles apart, in my humble opinion.
Yeah, like anything, I think it's a long story, but I can give the brief version of it. And I'm kind of known because several podcasts have labeled me the rage quit guy, and that's what happened. I was in a corporate environment. I was working in a company that I just had sort of lost my tolerance for, and honestly, like, there's good people there, right? It's not like I was working in hell or something like that. But during the course of a meeting that I was in, I just kind of got completely fed up, and I hung up and emailed my boss and told him I was done, and I walked out, and I really didn't have anywhere to go. So I had a friend who had a company at the time that was doing data entry, and the company, he invited me to join with him and expand. And we kind of worked on that for a couple of years. This was in 2009, but I got a big opportunity to do some work for eBay. And that got me into the tech world, which is really where I wanted to be, in the e-commerce world. And that sort of started it off from there. And I started putting together a group that worked on the customization of e-commerce sites. And then we eventually started getting more and more into direct development. In 2020, we got our first contract to write a full application, which is something that we had been doing internally with our own internal tools, but we started doing it for an external company at that point. And that particular contract became the largest platform for hotel revenue management analysis. It's essentially a business intelligence platform, and was eventually purchased to the great enrichment of the shareholders. Unfortunately, I was not one, but we worked for them, and is now, continues to go on, and we continue to do work for that company to this day. So it's been a really quite a ride, but I would say something that evolved from opportunity to opportunity, and based on the interests of our development team. We were lucky enough to get some really great software engineers who were early in their career and started with our company and evolved and became our CTO and our lead developers. And so we've got a great engineering team. So that's really kind of the short version. May not sound that short, but that's kind of the short version.
Effectively, all I'm hearing is that you rage quit into success.
Yeah, it's not quite that easy, but definitely, lots of ups and downs, lots of mistakes as an entrepreneur early on, especially. And as you go, you just make bigger and bigger mistakes and recover from them, I guess is how I would.
Hey man,
Uh,
I'm taking the bits I want. So basically, rage quit into success, and I think I'll put that in a t-shirt somewhere. Basically, so
I
there
want
you
to be
go.
clear. I do not recommend this as a career strategy. All right.
Well, there you go, fellas. That's the disclaimer essentially.
That's
But
my disclaimer. That's my disclaimer.
awesome
But
stuff. Now,
great.
guys, like I say, everyone I invite on here don't know the questions beforehand. So yes, I've had a chat with him for me to feel him out and for him to feel me out, but Paul doesn't know exactly what I'm going to be asking him. So everything you're getting from him is basically unfiltered experience and expertise, which is the way we like it here on Advantage Point. So with that being said, we'll move on to my list of questions. And you'll notice again, I love stats because I think it just builds a firm foundation for us to sort of have the discussion around. So here's my first question. So according to Gartner, 83% of IT leaders say that the pace of integration demand is outstripping the team's capacity to deliver. That sounds like huge pressure to me. Paul,
Yeah.
from Rosario's vantage point, working with SaaS platforms and marketplaces and compliance heavy industries, in your opinion, why does integration remain such a stubborn roadblock in 2025?
Wow. There's several reasons for that, and they've kind of all come together to a certain point. So one is the ability of or the challenges to creating a new SaaS platform based on a data source, which can be one that you're creating or one that you're integrating with. The barriers to entry have just come down dramatically, and so we have this explosion of sources. And one of the big problems with that is some of these platforms, you don't know how well funded they are, you don't know how well managed they are. They may be successful at time and not successful for a while, and we see, if you read in the news, lots of kind of failures in that area. And so it's very difficult to know which one to integrate with. We've been talking to an insurance tech company, which has that very important blocker, I would say, to their success. And writing the integrations has become difficult for them. So that's number one. The second one is, if you look at SaaS companies in general, and I'm not bashing programming languages. Like, if you're a programmer and you love Python, awesome. It's a great language. You could do a lot with it, and use Django for the web, but you're going to be happy probably with it. But unfortunately, Python was not really built for the web and for multi-threading. And this is an issue. If you look at the top programming languages that SaaS companies are using, which are Python, Node is extremely popular, and there are a couple of others, including PHP. They are designed around a single process, a single thread that kind of gets looped around, if you will. That's as technical as I'm going to get, I promise. But
It's all
it's a
right.
bit of a problem. It's a bit of a problem to build on top of that. And we build on top of a completely different language called Elixir, and we use the Elixir stack. It provides a number of advantages for developers, including you don't really have to learn both a front end and a back end framework if you're using the live view option on that. And that makes development go more quickly, but also it is a multi-threaded language. And what that means is, and I'll go back just real quick. I promise I'm not doing a history on Elixir, but it's built on top of Erlang by a gentleman named Jose Valim, who was really a huge contributor to the Ruby language before that. And he really liked the syntax. And you probably heard of Ruby and Ruby on Rails. And that's also another language that is very popular for startups. For example, Shopify, which is the world's largest e-commerce platform, is built on Ruby. So, it's a very good language, and programmers who work in it tend to enjoy working in it, even though that's gone down a little bit over time. But Jose Valim, he liked the way that, the syntax and just kind of the way that Ruby worked as a language, but he was really concerned about the fact that in his mind, it really wasn't built for the web, because of the way that it handled errors and disconnects and all that sort of thing. And if you think about it, what are the challenges on the web? You don't know where in the world that content or, that functionality that you've created is being served up. It could be anywhere, right? And it could be on a very poor mobile connection. It could be on, a web browser in a war zone, where the internet goes in and out. I mean, there's a lot of
Sure.
places that, that that that's being deployed, essentially that's being accessed from. And so that connection is not necessarily the greatest. And so Jose found this language called Erlang, which was developed by the Ericsson company. That's the Erlang, the Ericsson language. And it was designed for actually not the web, but telephone systems and telephone switches. And you can imagine, here's this Swedish telephone company, and they've got a telephone switch up in, I don't know, Vidsel, which is like way in the north, and it's kind of, in the middle of nowhere. And if that server has to be reset, and when an error occurs and you have to go send a guy out there, in the middle of nowhere, Sweden,
Yeah.
with 10 feet of snow on either side of the road, that's a big problem, right? But if you drop a call because of an error, well, people could just call back, right? And that's kind of how Erlang works. So Jose built this thing called Elixir on top of that. And since then, the Phoenix Web Framework and the LiveView Web Framework, and now there's even one for building native applications for phones, Android and iOS on top of that, but also like Apple TV and, other devices called LiveView Native. And so it's really a single stack. So it's easier for developers to work on. It's more, they can move more quickly. But also it's developed to handle all of these disruptions in the internet and in connectivity. And so if you're working on a framework that doesn't handle those situations well and causes an error and crashes your program, well, you can get around it, but it takes a lot of effort and it takes a lot of programming and networking knowledge. And then you also have to interface, most of these web applications are built on specific frameworks like Angular, or what's the big one, React, right? When you're building on those, you create this tension between front-end developers and back-end developers. And so a lot of your developer resources get like sucked into resolving the issues between those two systems. With Elixir, it's the same developer front end, back end, or your front end developers and your back end developers. If you divide them up that way, at least they speak the same language and they're programming in the same language and they understand each other. And so there's less conflict, things can go more smoothly, and the backend guys can spend more time on things like integrations and rather than just functionality. So one of the ways is, one of the issues that's come up is, this diversity of languages, and some are just not built for the web. So that's one of the ways that we overcome that. And then the other issue that is starting to come down is the cost of development expertise and development engineering. And you've probably heard of, like, I can't remember, it was OpenAI or somebody offering, $100 million or $1 billion to like a top coder, engineer, which I think is insane. And I think it's kind of like a PR move more than it is an actual, job offer. Probably requires, to pay out that much, it probably requires the company be worth, $500 billion after 2
Yeah.
more years or something like that, right? Like, there's probably strings attached to that, but nonetheless, like the cost. However, since COVID, development has moved to the cloud. And so you can get around that by sourcing developers worldwide, and the US developers are extremely expensive right now. That's why so many of them are becoming unemployed, is because they're competing with developers from other markets that don't have the same salary requirements, if you will. So that one's, but when that was peaking, a couple of years ago, that was a big problem, and still is. Like, it's still an issue for companies that are working solely with US developers. So those are kind of my three, and they're probably more reasons for that than not.
Sure. No, no, I think that's really helpful. And I think you're the first person I've spoken to that, and again, this is why, like I say, viewers, I try to find the movers and shakers of people who are actually sort of doing great stuff, because
Right.
he's brought a very technical aspect to it in terms of, if you're having two languages, and again, I'm no developer, so disclaimer, I'm no developer, so I'm going to try and recap what he said in a very simplistic way. But I think the biggest one that stood out to me is the fact that you've got front end development language and back-end development language. So when you're trying, integration struggles because a lot of time goes into trying to resolve what each other mean, like Lost in Translation, if anyone remembers that film. Whereas I think you said it was Elixir, what you guys used.
Yeah, Elixir. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it can be used for both front end and back end. So more time goes into actually doing the work as opposed to try to figure out what the other person's trying to say. Have I got that right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great.
Yeah, absolutely. And the only thing I would add on to that is that in React, and in these other front end frameworks, there there's kind of a big problem is you're pulling data from a lot of different sources. And so you have to decide, do I hook into that source through the back end, or do I let it come in through the front end? Because the front end code has become extremely complex and capable and so forth, even though it's all JavaScript, running in your browser for the most part. Like, that's another big decision. And that's another thing that kind of keeps CTOs up at night is, am I doing this the right way? And, so that's kind of a side, I guess, on top of that.
Sure. No, awesome stuff. Thanks. Thank you so much, Paul. You wrote that AI can be your worst employee. Okay. I looked at some of the stuff that you wrote. Now, this time the stats coming from Paul himself. So you wrote AI can be your worst employee. Now, where have you seen AI help integration, and where
Yeah.
does it actually create more errors or new work from your experience with
Yeah.
Rosario?
Yeah. That's a really good and kind of a deep question. And I'm glad that you picked up on my sort of clickbaity titles and called me out on it. But I do feel that way. When you're in development, we all know that LLMs are the drivers of things like Cursor and, the Anthropic system that is designed for, and I can't remember its name right now. It's designed for development. Has a very nice idea. Claude, right? Those systems are driven by LLMs, and LLMs have this really big problem, is that from time to time they hallucinate and they come up with responses that simply don't work. And I'll give you an example of it. Is I was trying to write an interface with weather for kind of a side project of mine for a weather API. And it did a really great job on the authentication part, et cetera. Like, it saved me a ton of time kind of working on boilerplate. But then I had a couple of additional functions that I wanted to add to that module. And as I did, I kept getting errors and compilation errors. And when I read what those errors were as I was compiling it, I thought, well, gee, I don't see what's wrong with that. That seems fine to me. And it turns out, so then I go, okay, well, wait a second. What is this particular library? What does this particular function do? And I researched that. I'm like, oh, that doesn't exist. Like, that just made that up. So it was trying to access functionality in a programming language that did not exist. And
Wow.
it doesn't do that very often, but it does it often enough that the amount of time that is spent on resolving that issue is more than the time saved by actually, having the LLM do the programming for you. The other thing, and it's another more recent article of mine, this is actually on LinkedIn that I wrote this article, is that a lot of programmers are seeing not only that, like, they're frustrated with that particular aspect of the process I just went over, but also they're noticing that like they're turning to the AI too quickly and they're becoming dependent on it. And they stop thinking through and they stop understanding their code base, which is like sort of the kiss of death for a code base. Because if you don't have a developer that understands it, it's going to be very difficult to, to continue on with it. So we've kind of shifted the way that we use AI. So AI is great at writing boilerplate, at making sure our testing is complete, at reviewing code. It sucks. And everybody from the Cursor team to, I think even Mark Zuckerberg admitted this, is that AI is not good at troubleshooting. So if you have an error, you're much better working with the compiler or with some tools rather than trying to have AI sort of troubleshoot a thorny error that keeps popping up. So we use it to kind of review code, say, hey, what might we be missing here? Because the LLMs do know of libraries that we may have not have heard of, et cetera. So that's one of the aspects that I think is changing. And then the other way that we use it, as we kind of divide out the portions that we use AI, we attack them one at a time rather than trying to have it write like these larger pieces of code. We try to, keep them down, and we think through them first. We think that, hey, I'm thinking of writing this. Here's how I'm thinking of doing it. Critique my approach. And there, the AI can be helpful. It's kind of like a second set of eyes. And sometimes it's full of crap. And sometimes it will tell us our approach, is wrong because of this and that when it's not. But for the most part, like, it's a good second set of eyes. And to be honest, like, I could have another senior developer looking at my code or looking at my approach and give me BS. And, and it's up to me to kind of figure that out. Right. So that's how you kind of get around that. And then I would say the other important way to sort of approach AI is not only to just know what its what's are, but to consult multiple AIs and say, how would you do this? How would you do this? How would you do this? And a lot of times, you can kind of pick the best response.
Sure. So you use it predominantly for sort of code writing, as it were, or in the coding aspect and software development aspect of your business, right?
Okay. Yeah. And there's a couple of things it does really well that I like. So for example, one of the downsides of Elixir is that it is a smaller language. It's one of the most loved by programmers that use it, but it's not the most widely used language, despite all the advantages that I talked about. But so it lacks maybe some libraries, and I can go take a library from JavaScript or from the package managers there, or from Python, or a script that's written in Python, etc. And I can have it translate it to the language that I'm working in, Elixir in this case, and it does that pretty well, right? Like, that will save me a lot of time. And so, I'm not getting a supported package, etc. But I mean, it works great. And then I can always go back to AI and kind of update it. So, it does do that very well. The other thing that it will do is, I had created, and I can't remember what it was with Squarespace or something. I was just, creating a page for a website, which was drag and drop, like the easiest of all approaches. And then I said, and I had it hosted on this URL just momentarily. And I said, hey, bring that in and write it for me in this language and incorporate it into this project. Like, that was just styling and formatting and stuff. And it did that extremely well. So there are ways to use it to move more quickly. And those are some of them.
Thank you very much, Paul. Here's another one. IDC found that nearly 40% of SaaS projects stall at onboarding because of, you guessed it, integration challenges. Now, in your What is a Stack article, you stressed the importance of solid foundations. What's the most common stack blind spot you see teams missing when they try to stitch systems together too quickly?
Yeah.
And and when those cracks show, is it usually the customer who feels it first, say at checkout, billing, or support, in your opinion?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say the most common mistake that I've seen in there, my CTO, I mean, he's been exposed to way more code than I have, may have a different opinion on this. From my standpoint, it's a design issue, and you need to have a way of writing interfaces. So rather than sort of bringing a call to a specific type of or a specific API and integration, right? Rather than writing individual calls and sort of incorporating them directly into the functions, you should break those out so that you have interfaces with each of the different integrations, not only as their own module, but also you should be able to update them individually so that from the core application, I'm going to make a specific function call out to an adapter, and the adapter says, okay, what's the context here? Which API am I going out to? What information am I bringing back? And that adapter is responsible for formatting the call, going out, but also bringing the data in the way you want it so that it's easy to change. For example, for my weather application, I may want to use two different weather APIs simply because one of them might be down. Like that integration, if I have an adapter, I can handle that in the adapter itself. And then I can go and I can evolve my core code. And what will happen is in a lot of cases, those adapters, there aren't adapters out there. There are those API calls are kind of sitting in the core code. And when they're sitting right there in the core code, that means I got to update my core. I might make another mistake. I could like forget a semicolon, and then now I'm gone into this looping error issue that I've got to figure out. So it's also an architectural choice, and so using the right structure. And there are like this isn't whoops I'm hold on.
Closer, yeah, you're about to make a very important point there. Go on.
Yeah, I'm obviously making a really important point here. But let me just bring that down, bring that back to reality. But yeah, that that little AI thing from my camera.
Yeah.
But the reality is, I've got to structure it properly. This is not something that I've invented or made up or is Rosario specific. These are best practices that should be used, but unfortunately, especially in startups when you're kind of like working with your guy or whatever, or you're moving really quickly and you're just trying to get a proof of concept out there.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah, you may cut some corners that will come back to bite you when you're scaling up. So I think you see a lot of that going on is, oh, we got our prototype, just barely works and now it's funded and they want us to start adding customers on it, where what we really need to do to scale up is to go back and address the technical debt and architectural issues.
Makes perfect sense. Thank you so much. So here's another one again.
Yeah.
McKinsey found that SaaS teams using more than three integration platforms often see costs rise faster than revenue. So where is the line? When is Zapier good enough? And when do you insist on full engineering grade integrations from your perspective?
Wow. That's a very big question. But you mentioned, I think, Zapier, right?
Yeah.
And most Zapier integrations are pretty incomplete. And so once you're past the prototype stage, you need to start ripping out all of those integrations. Now, some of the Zapier stuff, if it's very simple and it's very specific to a piece of data that maybe not isn't like super critical to the organization of the code or to the the information coming in, like that can work good. Like Zapier is a great platform, and it can save time when you're building a prototype. But when you have a very data heavy situation where you need to exchange a lot of data between your platform and the other platform, you should really be looking to write your own. Now, going back to what I was talking about before from an architectural standpoint, if I've been using adapters or protocols, or like there's several different ways to skin this cat, but I'm using adapters because it's a word that's easy for most people to understand.
Sure.
Is I can actually write those to include my zaps initially, and then I can go back and replace those, and it's not gonna, when it's appropriate, like when the time is necessary, and I can do them one at a time if I've architected things properly. So I think they can be part of it, but in general, you don't want to do that. The other big problem, which your question kind of hints at, is when you get more than 3 integrations involved, there can be conflicts between the various integrations. And the most common conflict is what I would call a race situation. So I need like 3 different pieces of data, but they're coming from 3 different APIs. And if I'm using Zaps or something else like that, I'm kind of limited in the way that I can handle the fact that I got to go get one piece of data. Okay. And then that piece of data I need to feed to the other thing. And then I have another thing that I need data from, but it's not necessarily dependent on the second thing, so like getting that sequence and that workflow correct from a programming standpoint is, if those are the types of problems you're having, you need to rip those out and get them in. And the more that you have, the more difficult those things are going to be to troubleshoot. So I think you want to, as soon as you can afford to, and as soon as you start going from a prototype to a production ready application, you want to start writing your own.
Makes sense. Thank you so much. Okay, right. Let's see which one I'm going to pick. All right, I'll pick this one.
Okay.
Regulated industries face even higher stakes. Miss one compliance step and you're in legal hot water.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it's the same thing over in the US as it is here in the UK. But with automatic FFL, you built compliance right into e-commerce flow. So for SaaS leaders outside regulated spaces, what's the broader lesson in your experience about baking resilience and governance into integration design?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'm going to go back to the architecture again, and need to have the ability to change. Regulations are changing all the time. And so you need to be able to change your business logic when the regulations change. And ideally, you've structured your business logic in such a way that that can be done mainly by changing parameters or data rather than having to go back and recode things. Let's say you're building with PHP in a Symfony framework. There are these things called twigs, which are essentially pieces of data that sort of govern different parts of the application, and they compile up together into these big, YAML or YML files. So you can definitely use a data first approach to be able to move more quickly. You also want to be very, very clear to your users, like how much you're responsible for and how much your platform, because there's, for automatic FFL takes the checkout process for buying a firearm online in the US. And despite, probably, what you've seen in social media, it's not as easy as like you go on, you buy a firearm and it shows up at your house. No, you have to go get it from a dealer. You have to go through an in-person background check, et cetera. Like that all still has to take place. And so what we provide is that we provide good data on the dealers that will take delivery of that firearm, and we put them in a map. And so when you're checking out as a customer, it basically ensures that the shipping address is an authorized shipping address. So that's and we make it clear that, but once the order is placed, like you still have, your responsibilities for checking things. And any online firearms merchant that has been in business for any amount of time understands that, knows that they're going to be audited. Their records are going to be audited at some point, and we handle the records for that, and we store them, and they can access their account and see they can show to authorities that, that what they did was compliant. But things change, and sometimes sometimes the cost of a certain type of compliance is not worth completely automating it. So parts of that application. So for example, shipping ammo in some states in the United States has to be done to an FFL, a federal firearms licensee. And you can imagine, California, Illinois, New York, places like in Boston or Massachusetts, etc. But in other places, it can be shipped directly to the individual person purchasing it, in Texas, for example. And those rules change state by state for a while. And, we could hire a lawyer and have him update it and provide extremely explicit rules on that. Or we give a broader tool that allows the merchant to decide, okay, I'm going to ship to these states or not ship to these states, or in these states, I'm going to require FFL and not require shipment to an FFL in these other states, even though, like the individual requirements can be on like even a neighborhood level, like in Chicago and places like that. So, and we went on for a while, like that's a big thing. Like that's almost as complex as like sales tax or something like that in the US, which I wish we would do what you guys do over there, where you have your VAT and it's kind of the same everywhere, right? Yeah, here, no, like from one side of the street to the other, the sales tax you have to apply could change. So, and that has to be reflected online. But we said, it's probably good enough for our users to be able to choose that on a state by state level. And then they can decide, hey, I'm just not going to ship to Chicago, and they can have their own shipping rules behind that. But everybody has different requirements. And so we provided a tool for them and a feature for them that was, that satisfied most of the requirements. We made it clear that we're not responsible for your eventual shipping, but we are going to help you out with this feature by enabling you to, to do to ship the ammunition properly or, in a compliant way. But you still got to check it. You're still responsible for the ultimate result.
Of course. Thank you so much for that. I think it really puts it in context, basically. Okay. I'm just looking at the time, and I'm very conscious about the time. Don't want to overstay. I don't want to overstay my visit, as it were. So, and I always say to everyone, I think I've said it on nearly episode I've done so far, that you guys that bring on, there's so much experience and expertise to sort of extrapolate everything in a 40-minute sort of episodes. I have a feeling that probably we'll be inviting you back again, and
Absolutely.
I'll put him on the spot. Oh, yeah, there you go. He's agreed, so he can't say no now. I'll put him on the spot, and he caved into pressure. So there you go.
I enjoy speaking to you, Daniel, and you have really insightful questions. So this is a treat for me.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Okay, so we're moving on to the last couple ones now. So Harvard Business Review reports that integration failures cause nearly 60% of unplanned SaaS downtime. So when a webhook goes quiet or an API throttles, what's your first 5-minute playbook? That's the first part of the question. So store that away. And then second part of the question, if you could build a simple dashboard that prevented 80% of your integration headaches, what would it show?
Yeah. That's it. Yeah. So I wasn't even thinking of going down the dashboard route. So first of all,
or if you could do one better, absolutely, you're the expert. So if you think something better, please, by all means, let us know.
Yeah. So going back to kind of those adapters that I was talking about, you need to build them so that they can handle errors and handle loss of connection. And so part of it is programming language. We talked about that before. If something goes down, if I'm not getting data back, etc., my language should handle that, and it shouldn't crash the application. If I built it in the wrong language and I don't have handling for that specific error, it might go down. In our case, our systems don't go down from that kind of an issue. So that's the first part of it. But I could see, so I'm going to put myself in the shoes of someone that created an application that's going down when an error is. So my first thing would be to probably I'm going to have to restart the application, and then I'm going to take a developer and say, hey, what happened here? What went down? And if you're appropriately logging your server responses, and so you should be able to see what happened and what went down. And it could be from the integrations, but it also could be like a database integration, which databases are not necessarily like part of the core application anymore. I might be using Google Big Table or whatever as my database instead of some SQL database or MongoDB or something on prem. So basically I'm saying that I can have those errors for a lot of different reasons, but I should be building the error handling into it. So I'm going to, obviously restart the application, make sure it gets up and running for my folks again. Second, I'm going to isolate that error, and we're going to probably create a patch to handle it. And then, we'll deploy it as quickly as we can. So that's like my go-to playbook in terms of a dashboard to keep that from happening. Yeah, that would really be kind of a visual representation of the logs. And there are dashboards out there, depending on where you have your application deployed. For example, we use Google Cloud, but you could be using AWS or something else. And Google Cloud has, these great error, logging systems, and it will show you kind of what response took the thing down. It kind of already exists, but there are others that if you're, say, hosting somewhere else that we use, especially for PHP, like Zabbix, and there's some other tools that you can use that, those dashboards kind of already exist, and they evolve pretty quickly. So I would say I would use one of those that already exists.
Right. Okay. Let me ask it this way then. I guess what I'm trying to get to is that, given your expertise, if you had a magic wand and you could wave it and you had the perfect solution to reduce sort of integration issues, what would that solution look like? Effectively, I guess is what I'm trying to get to.
Yeah.
Or does it currently exist? Everything you need currently exists. Is that maybe the situation?
There are a lot of data visualization tools that currently exist where you can actually see data flowing from one thing to another, and you can see when it's not going and when it's not arriving at its destination.
All right.
That are pretty sophisticated. Microsoft Azure has a really great one, but there's some others as well out there. I think that, from my standpoint, it's more like a notification. Hey, this thing has started to fail. It's failing, and getting the attention of a developer. Like if I had some sort of notification system that, sounds the alarm and turns on the red rotating beacon, flashing light, like that's what I would want. That's what I would want, is like that notification, so we can get on top of it as quickly as possible.
And do you know what's that? I mean, again, I'm a disclaimer, I'm no coder or anything along those lines, but that sounds quite simplistic to me. So are you saying something like that does not exist?
So I can get notifications, but I kind of have to pay attention to them. So I'm saying, like, give me something that's on my desktop that says, "Oh, like, pay attention to this right now." That's what I would.
Right. Okay. Excellent. Yeah. Okay. Makes sense. Okay, and the final question: if I said to you in the next 2 years or the next 10 years, I would say, so that was the last part of my podcast episodes. 10-year plans are a very kind of abstract thing now, because the industry, the economy, everything changes so rapidly. It's so hard to know what 10 years is going to look like. So if I shorten it down to the next 2 years, for example, knowing where you and Rosario want to be, what would you say are the biggest bottlenecks or pinch points sort of hamstringing you from getting there? That's
a really good question. I would say the number one is the direction we're going now with building our own applications and our SaaS offering, our B2B SaaS offerings. I think funding comes to mind.
Okay.
Not so much funding the development, but funding the marketing and the distribution of that. So I think that's kind of, one of the bottlenecks that we're going to go through is how, Because we have two ways to do it. One is to just kind of bootstrap it and just reinvest all of the new revenue. But, there's going to be this gap of time when revenue is not coming in. And how do we handle it if that dries up? And honestly, like, that's the thing that keeps me up at night, because I can take funding from someone else, but, they want something in return.
Entirely, yeah.
And they're the ones with the money, so they usually have the leverage. So making sure that I get that deal and that funding in place before I need it is kind of that bottleneck. So I think funding is definitely one of them. The others are things that we have faced in the past. And part of this is that the software development ecosystem is constantly in flux, and things are changing rapidly, and more rapidly now that the barriers are down and the barriers to entry for new services, et cetera, are there. So it's really making sure that not only are we offering something of value, but we're doing it before other folks, or we're doing it in a way that really reaches a specific, ideal customer, and that somebody else isn't doing. So those are probably the two big things that sort of keep me up at night, make me think about, where we're going to go, and solving those two issues is like a constant thing.
Sure. Thank you so much for sharing. And one of the reasons, and thank you for opening up, because one of the reasons I asked those questions, because I want to make, from our perspective, you're the superstar, at Rosario, doing stuff, moving stuff, shaking stuff. So what I always like to do is try and make things, relatable, because you're going to have some people who are watching who are just starting out, and you're going to have some people who are where you guys are. So I think one of the things I just like to do is just to say, hey, in as much as, Paul and his team are smashing it, every business has things that they're dealing with. And like you say, things that are keeping you up at night. And I'm sure it's only going to be a matter of time before you resolve those. I have every confidence in you, Mr. Byrne. If anyone can do it, you can, definitely.
Thanks very, very much. I just, to give a little perspective on that, we've been through 3 major pivots in the last 14 years. And every single time, you're essentially betting the company that you got it right. And so fortunately, until now, we've got it right, but we're in the middle of another major pivot right now. And the company's on the table again. And the outcome is not yet decided. I would also say that if you had asked me that question 6 months ago, I would have said something about AI. You'll notice I didn't say anything about AI. And it's because I think, I have a much clearer vision of where that's going, and how to be flexible enough to tie into that, and to see it coming. My answer has changed quite a bit in the past 6 months.
Yeah, and this is what goes back to what we're saying about 10-year plans and 5-year plans. And I'm sure if we spoke to you, in another sort of dimension or timeline, 6 months from now, your answer may very well likely be
It's probably going to be the opposite. Yeah,
exactly, given today. So we completely understand that, and maybe if the time is the best, because maybe someone else might be dealing with those challenges. And I'm sure the next time when you come on, because you've agreed to come on again, when we ask you how have you gotten on, I'm sure you'll be letting us know that's your bet, your bet's worked off, and you guys have hit another inflection point, and you're continuing to smash it. So again,
well,
Paul,
let's hope so.
Yeah, well, again, like I have every confidence in you, my friend. I'm sure you've made the right call.
I hope so. I don't think, success kind of builds on success. And fortunately, we have a base of success to build on. So I think we have a better chance of surviving than someone who's just starting from scratch. But, nothing's guaranteed. And entrepreneurs are just delusional enough to think that they can actually figure it out.
So once again, Paul, thank you again so much for joining us. And for all those listening, you can hear more about Rosario at rosario.com. And unfortunately, that's it for this episode of Advantage Point. And if you found today's conversation useful, share it with your team and subscribe for more deep dives on what the best companies like Paul and Rosario are doing differently in 2025. Until next time, thanks for tuning in. Be well.